The war in Iran has officially reached the 6-month mark as the president's goals for the conflict and the path to end it remain unclear. What is clear, this war and its economic consequences are deeply unpopular, with less than 10 weeks to go until the midterms. In the past 180 days of war, 18 U.S. service members have been killed, and more than 750 have been wounded. There are more than 50,000 troops stationed in the region. According to an NBC News estimate, the war has cost between $80 and $100 billion. That's more than double the Pentagon's estimate of $37.5 billion. NBC News reporting shows that U.S. military bases have suffered more than $1 billion in damages, and the Pentagon's munitions have been significantly depleted. The president, who now says he's focusing economic pressure on Iran rather than military force, has repeatedly shifted the goals and the timeline of the war since the beginning.
We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership, and as you know, that was done in about an hour, so we're ahead of schedule there by a lot. We're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. We're not ready to leave yet, but we will be leaving in the near future. So many people say, oh, well, why are you doing this way? We can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. I've been doing this for 6 weeks, and their military is totally defeated.
Those were from March and April. Now the president saying he has no time schedule for Iran to return to negotiations, and the conflict's beginning to look more and more intractable, something the president insisted would not happen when he spoke to my colleague Kristen Welker earlier this summer.
During your 2016 campaign, you called the Middle East a quagmire. What makes you so sure this won't become a quagmire?
We're not going to be there.
You're convinced this won't become a quagmire?
It's not a quagmire.
Now, as we said, the war is deeply unpopular with the American public. A plurality disapproved of the U.S. strikes on Iran in March when the conflict began. That number has now risen to 63%. Just 34% approve of the president's handling of the war, according to Fox News polling. Driving those numbers, frustration over the economic impact of the conflict. The flow of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains significantly lower before the war, even as the president insists the strait is open.
We have total control over the Hormuz Strait right now. They don't have control. We have total control. We own it. After we finish defeating Iran, which is being very badly defeated, pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States. Right now, the strait is open. A lot of boats are coming through. The strait is open. We're taking a lot of boats. Millions and millions of barrels of oil are coming out of the strait every day.
I guess it depends on your definition of open. Yesterday, just 9 ships transiting the strait, according to analysts. That's far below the pre-war average. The overall impact pushing oil prices above pre-war prices. Gas is on average $1 more a gallon than before. Inflation's up overall as well, clocking in a full % higher this month than back in February. All of it likely to be on the minds of voters as they head to the polls in November. Joining me now, NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Also with me on set, senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube and national politics reporter Ben Kamisar. Let's start with you, Yamiche. The president's strategy when it comes to his public messaging on the war in recent weeks has just been to double down, this despite the public disapproval of the war. What is the thinking in the White House about the public's tolerance for this conflict to continue?
Well, it's a key question, and it's not clear whether or not the president has been moved by these polls that show not only Americans, but Republicans in particular, when you look at the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, that Republicans have also soured on this war. Overall, the president is really sticking to the idea that he believes Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, and that is the driving force for this war, though we have heard the vice president give a different understanding of the war, saying that he was concerned that oil prices were the reason why why this war with Iran was necessary. The other thing to note here is that the president, as you said, that timeline has shifted so much. At first, it was 4 to 5 weeks. Now the president essentially saying, I'm in no hurry. I have no deadline. Also saying he's not moved by the midterm. So it's really in some ways unclear what the White House's overall strategy, what the president's overall strategy is here, other than the fact that, of course, we did see this week the president essentially give an ultimatum to all countries around the world saying that they need to cut financial ties with Iran. That the big question, of course, whether or not China is going to actually heed any of that warning or change anything, given the fact that they're a big trading partner with Iran, buying about 80% of its shipping oil. But big questions and not a lot of answers, Ryan.
Yeah, let's expand on that idea, Yamiche. The White House is calling it Economic D-Day on Monday. Secretary Bessent said the first economic sanctions would be announced then. What do we know?
Well, it's good that you asked that question because I was looking at what was going to be rolled out, because when Secretary Bessent set this up, he said that there were going to be major financial institutions that were going to see a lot of impact from this. What we can see now is that there were a few individuals with ties to Iran that the administration targeted today, but there was no real big news here. What we know now is that they're continuing to, in some ways, make calls. We don't exactly know who the president's been calling, but the administration continues to say that he's personally calling world leaders. We know that the president was mad at South Korea at one point for not wanting to be involved militarily in the war. But this is really in some ways an expanding issue for the United States, that it's not just about a war in Iran now. Now he's essentially, the president, asking all of his friends, all of his neighbors, everyone that has anything to do with Iran to also get behind the United States. And that's complicating things, Ryan.
Okay. Yamiche Alcindor, thank you for starting us off. Courtney, let's turn to you. We got Yamiche's point of view here on how the White House is trying to end this, or at least bring it to an end economically. But there's still quite a bit of military might in the region, 50,000 troops at last check. What's their posture now as we extend into the 6 months? Could there be a reignition of military action there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the military posture there hasn't changed since major combat operations ended. So since this war started back in February, and that includes more than 50,000 troops, more than 20 ships. There's hundreds of aircraft there. And that is because the military isn't sure if Donald Trump is going to say one day, look, I want to restart major combat operations. So they are keeping the flexibility that he needs and that the military leadership needs. If Trump were to order to do so, they could do it very quickly. One of the biggest things that has changed over the course of this war is what we've been talking about a lot in the last several months. That's munitions. So the military that are there, they have restocked their supplies, right? So they've got what they need if they need to take long-range strikes, or if they need to take long-range defensive action. But the U.S. stockpiles have been depleted during the course of this war. And it's something that's been happening for more than a year now, but it was really accelerated during the 40 days of combat here. And so that is a big shift. And the reason that matters is if President Trump were to decide he wants to restart major combat operations, that could play into how long the U.S. military could sustain that. Not, again, just the offensive, but almost more importantly, the defensive component of that. Iran still has a military. They could put the U.S. military and allies in the region at risk. And the U.S. simply does not have the same capability to defend against it.
I mean, under any circumstances, is there a pure military solution to this? I mean, if there were, wouldn't we have already employed it at this point?
We have heard so many military experts say you cannot bomb your way out of this, and that an air combat campaign alone, it's just not going to win this. But the reality is right now, so we're in this economic phase, right? The military pressure still exists in that the military is carrying out this blockade. There's still this tension over the Strait of Hormuz. But just to show that Iran's not down and out, they're still firing projectiles on a nearly daily basis at commercial ships that are going through the Strait of Hormuz. So even if the military is shooting them down or they're not actually effective attacks, just the threat of that has an impact on the Strait of Hormuz. And that has become such a big issue here. It's another one. I don't know how that gets resolved.
I think what you're hinting at is it would require at least ground troops to even begin that conversation.
Or there needs to be some sort of an agreement that everyone can come to. But again, President Trump has been very clear about the fact that he wants that to remain open and Iran can't own the Strait. But I don't really know what the solution here is going to be. That's another one that you really can't even bomb your way out of the Strait of Hormuz problem.
And one more quick one for you, Courtney. You talked about the munitions problem, but there's also a funding problem, right? They've said that it's already cost $37.5 billion. Our estimates are that it's way beyond that. They're going to have to ask Congress for more money here, right? And that's by no means a guarantee.
Absolutely. So they need money for the munitions. Like dozens and dozens and dozens of aircraft have been destroyed during the course of this war. And then there's just the basic operating cost of keeping all these thousands of troops and these ships and everything. The ships are also undergoing really tough deployments, extended deployments. Then they need to come back. They need to be refitted. Everything needs to be, fixed up and cleaned up. So all of that costs a lot of money. So the Pentagon's asking for $1.5 trillion. The math is just frankly fuzzy and confusing. We would believe, according to our reporting, that it's upwards of $100 billion that this war has costed, and that is not even including the day-to-day maintenance of the more than 50,000 troops that are still there today.
Worth pointing out, $1.5 trillion when we just saw the national debt rise over $40 trillion. An interesting ask, especially from a Republican administration. All right, we've talked about the economics. We talked about the military part of this. Let's talk about the politics, Ben. How does this impact the midterms? What are voters telling us about what they think about this war, and how could it manifest itself when they actually go to the polls?
Yeah, I think the big problem for the president here is that it started off in the polls as an unpopular war, and it continues six months later as an unpopular war. And all of the things that Courtney was bringing up about all of the issues on the battlefield, they have this economic trickle down, right? We're seeing prices continue to go up. You're seeing poll results that show that people are confused and concerned about the goals here. They don't know when it's going to end. There was a recent poll. The plurality of folks said they thought this was going to last a year or more, or months. And then other folks said months. There really were not many people that think this is going to wind its way down soon. And to the questions of, what are the down trail political effects of this? Even if the president was going to snap his fingers tomorrow and answer all of the questions that Courtney posed that certainly I can't answer, this stuff takes time, right? Maybe the economic trickle down, the economic stuff could work itself out within some period of weeks and months, depending on all of the answers to Courtney's questions. But if not, people are going to be feeling the same economic impacts and the same frustrations when they cast their ballot.
Today, maybe that wouldn't be enough. But it's interesting you talk about this from an economic perspective, Ben, because, generally voters, foreign policy is not number one on their list. But this is one of those rare issues where foreign policy and their pocketbooks directly intertwined, right?
Yeah, and I think it's the big messaging question for the Republicans, right, for the president. The president, I always go back to this, he told our colleague Kristen Welker right after he won. He won on groceries and he won on immigration, right? So immigration is an issue where he's lost some ground on, and prices is a thing. We talked about this, you talked about this in the beginning. Prices have been sticky. Prices have not been going down to the rate that he wants them to go down. The gas prices you're seeing here are a constant reminder day to day, and Democrats have done a, so far, pretty good job at connecting those gas prices that the voters see every day to this war. So, yes, there is a foreign policy discussion here, and Republicans want to make that argument. Republicans want to say, look, you're taking hits in your pocketbook, sure, but look at what we're going to do. We can't have, and this is in their voice, right, but we can't have an Iran that continues to, push us around. So that's going to be the question is, can they make that sale, or voters can be focused on these economic
the polling is telling us that voters do not seem that concerned about Iran as an imminent threat to the point where they're willing to pay $4 a gallon for gas. And then, obviously, the president's never going to be on the ballot again. But his Republican colleagues, Courtney, his Republican colleagues are going to be on the ballot this fall. Are they concerned about how this is going to affect them?
Again, you talk about this is so far we're seeing this politically through the lens of an economic issue, right? And if people are voting with their wallets, that's the big question for them right now is are voters going to be willing to give them benefit of the doubt? And we saw this with Joe Biden in his presidency talking about the war with Russia, right? It was the same argument, which was, don't worry, I know that the economy is tough right now, but we're fighting this larger fight for freedom against Russia, and we're backing our allies, and we're doing something bigger than this. So if gas goes up a little bit, you're going to be okay. And voters didn't really buy that. And I think the big question or concern for Republicans is, why will this be any different?
Yeah, you could make the same argument. That was the argument Joe Biden made around COVID, and it did not resonate with the voters either. All right. Ben and Courtney, thanks for a great conversation. We appreciate it. As we look ahead to the midterms, though, House Democrats are feeling confident about their chances to retake the chamber, with the House Democratic campaign arm designating dozens of Republican-held districts as in play. That includes Nebraska's 1st congressional district, where Congressman Mike Flood is defending his seat against a challenger from Democratic candidate Chris Backemeyer. And joining me right now is Chris Backemeyer. He's running to represent Nebraska's 1st congressional district. Thank you so much for joining me, Chris. We're going to get to your race in a moment, but I want to start with the war in Iran, specifically because of your background and expertise. You recently wrote an op-ed critical of the war, particularly about the amount of money being spent on it. it. If you're elected to Congress, what are you going to do to change this situation?
Well, first, thanks for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience. I think the point that I tried to make in my op-ed was that this war was without any sort of strategic objective, any sort of thought about how we were going to get out of the war and what we were going to accomplish and what the risks were. We're seeing those risks play out on the ground in my district every single day, where people are frustrated at the high gas prices, the high grocery prices, the high fertilizer prices that are affecting our largest industry, which is agriculture. And so if I'm elected, I'm going to insist on Congress being a co-equal branch of government again and asserting its authority over the war powers.
And how does that work out to a way that you can bring it to an end? I understand you opposed the war from the beginning, but now it's a thing that exists that you've got to deal with. What's the exit strategy that would allow for the least amount of pain for who could be your potential constituents?
Well, the reality is that there are a lot of bad options on the table right now. And as you might know, I was one of the negotiators of the 2015 nuclear deal. And we negotiated that deal because the military options were so bad that we knew that, as your panelist mentioned earlier, you can't just bomb your way out of this situation. And so it's not going to be for Congress to be able to come up with a strategy, but Congress can insist that the administration pull together a strategy where it can get out of this conflict. But unfortunately, the reality is the steps that have been taken, the steps that have been supported and voted for by House Republicans, by Mike Flood, that support has led us to a situation where we have very bad options to get out.
So in that vein, would you be supportive of any sort of supplemental funding request if it came to that point?
Well, certainly, I think Congress should take a hard look at any sort of supplemental funding request. Obviously, we need to ensure that our troops are supported while they're in harm's way, but any sort of request would need to come with a really clear pathway on what we're trying to accomplish in this conflict and how we're going to get out of it. Again, the administration and the support of congressional Republicans has put us in a really bad spot. The people in my district are feeling it every single day. I'll tell you that I just had a woman come up to me the other day in my district, a Republican, who came up and asked me what I thought about this war and how we're going to get out of it, because she had two young boys that were nearing draft age, and she was worried that we might be getting to a point where we'd be getting into another forever war and might be considering going into a draft. I couldn't tell her how exactly we're going to get out of that. Congress should be standing up. Our current delegation should be standing up, going to the White House, insisting that there's a real strategy to get out of this war, and finding a way that we can do that.
But, I mean, you have a level of expertise here. Earlier this month, Senator Chris Murphy told Meet the Press that he'd support a bad deal if it meant reopening the Strait of Hormuz, if it meant an end to the conflict. Do you think we're at this point now where we have to accept a bad deal? And what specifically, given what you know about the region and the contours of the deal that you helped to negotiate, would get us to a place where things might get better?
Well, it's worth looking at what we accomplished in the first place. And when you look at the deal that was on the table with the ceasefire that the Trump administration negotiated, it offered all sorts of things that were never even contemplated in the 2015 nuclear deal. And so they've created a baseline that makes it incredibly difficult. It's also worth pointing out that Iran has never had control of the Strait of Hormuz, and now they do. And so we're starting from a place, a baseline that is much lower than it ever should have been. What's a good deal and what's a bad deal is all going to be relative, but what's most important is that we find a way to address the nuclear threat. Iran still has 10 warheads worth of nearly enriched or nearly weapons-grade uranium in the country, and we need to make sure that we're addressing the very real economic pain that people are going through. You know, the people in my district are talking about this all the time. They're struggling to make ends meet, and we have a war without a strategy, without a plan for getting out of it. And so there's two ways to really get the job done, which is what my opponent continues to talk about. Getting the job done either puts American troops on the ground, which would be insane, or it involves a diplomatic agreement that can resolve these issues.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other issues that you're confronting as a candidate. Obviously, the war has led to concerns about energy prices, affordability, still the top issue for voters. If Democrats retake the House and Senate, you're still going to have to contend with Donald Trump as president. How can Democrats work to address the cost of living in a way that will get the president's support?
Well, clearly, you're right. We are going to have to contend with a president who has 2 years left in his term and is going to be continuing to pursue policies that we probably disagree with. But the bottom line is if the Democrats are able to retake the Congress, and if I am one that's lucky enough to be elected, there's a number of things that we need to do. We need to bring an end to this reckless trade war that the administration started. These tariffs have hurt doubly in my district here, where they have driven up prices for consumers just like they have across the country. But they've also driven up prices and the cost of producing for our farmers and our ranchers. And it has ruined their export markets, making it harder for them to sell their products. And so for my district, that's the number one thing we need to do. When you expand the child tax credit, make sure that working families have a little bit of a boost in this economy and are able to get a little bit of help. And then we need to fix our healthcare system. That's a huge part of every family's budget. It comes up in every single town hall that I do. It's too hard and too expensive to get healthcare. So these are things that we need to focus on. And we as Democrats need to focus on putting a bill, an affirmative agenda on the president's desk. Whether he votes for it is going to be a real question mark, but that's what we need to do.
Okay, let's talk about one of the biggest issues confronting the Democratic Party in particular. It's dividing many of your candidates in these primaries across the country, and that is aid to Israel. Last month, nearly half of the House Democrats voted to cut off military support to the country. How would you vote on that issue?
Well, look, I think that our support to Israel plays a really important role in our national security, but there's no question there two things can be true. We can also have real concerns about how the Israeli government has conducted the war in Gaza, and I share those concerns. I think if elected to Congress, we need to have a real hard look on making sure that aid is conditioned on being consistent with U.S. policy and U.S. law, and that should go for every single one of our allies. And so that's something that I would be, very concerned about if elected.
Do you feel the bill that was before Congress just recently did not have enough of those conditions? Would you have voted no on that bill?
I think that bill went too far as far as the conditions that it had, but I do believe that there should be conditions as far as U.S. policy, being consistent with U.S. policy and consistent with international law. Yeah.
All right. And let's finally talk about the race that you're in. You're taking on Congressman Mike Flood. He won his race in 2024 by more than 20 points. It's a district that President Trump carried by 13 points. On paper, people might think that you're a long shot. How do you plan to be successful there?
Well, it's real simple. The reality is that in this district, we have an amazing amount of energy and we have a really strong hunger for change. The reality is that you're right. A lot of people did vote for Congressman Flood. A lot of people did vote for President Trump. And those same people, in return, have gotten very little. They've gotten a trade war that has driven up costs and driven up prices here in the district, a trade war that has made our largest industry, agriculture, that much more difficult for our farmers to make a profit. They've seen their health care get cut. They've seen a new war in Iran, and they've seen our national debt go up to $40 trillion. And so when I'm out talking to people, these are the things that they're frustrated about. And so this isn't what they voted for. This isn't what they got. And so we believe that we're able to have enough energy to bring this across the finish line in November. And as of right now, it looks incredibly promising.
So, but you're going to have folks in that district who voted for Donald Trump cast a ballot for you this time around. Do you have a specific message to someone that may have voted for Donald Trump 3 different times that would now need to vote for you in order for you to be successful?
We have people show up at our town halls, at our events all the time that have voted for President Trump and that regret that vote because of what they're seeing, because of how it's impacting their pocketbooks. So my message to those people is that I'm here to represent you. I'm here to stand up against policies that aren't going to work for Nebraskans, no matter what party is pursuing them. And I'm here to make sure that your voice is heard in Washington, and that's something that they don't feel like is happening right now. I mean, their own representative voted for the tariffs that are destroying the economy here, that have plunged our farm economy into crisis. Their own representative supported and voted for this war in Iran that has made things more expensive for everybody. And so they're not getting the representation that they want. And my message to them is that I will have their back.
Okay. Chris Backemeyer, I caught that. They've got their back. It sounds like a campaign slogan.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.